Right off the top, I've got to share with you some of the things that we'll be talking about during the course of this morning. We have what I'd call a busy guest schedule, so we're going to try to shoehorn all the guests in and then get to what little we can on some of the actual newsworthy topics that will be taking place, not only in Idaho, but around the world as well. I've got a guest coming up with us in about 15 minutes, and he is an old friend of mine. In fact, he was my personal lawyer when I lived in the state of Delaware. He was also a personal friend of Beau Biden, the son of the Vice President of the United States, who passed away over the course of the weekend. And he's got some thoughts about that. A far less polarizing figure than his father was, which you don't often find in a political family. Usually the apples don't fall far from the tree, but it's quite a different story with Beau Biden. Not nearly, I guess you'd say, as liberal as his father was when it came to being a Democrat. Some details on that coming up a little later this morning, of course. Also, Randy Staples will be joining us later in this hour from Idaho Weekly Briefing. He's had a very busy week. I was looking over some of what he's been covering, and I've got a long list of notes. We'll try to get to those because a couple of days ago, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, the infamous Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, has rejected Idaho's 20-week ban on abortions after 20 weeks, and some other details too that are taking place around the state. Just some other things you may be willing to listen to and that you need to really know about. And also have a guest coming up, Chris Anderson from the Herritt Center at CSI, scheduled to join us to talk a little bit about what's going on astronomically and the like. In the next hour, he'll be along, and in the next hour, some thoughts about a matter of faith that I encountered over the weekend as well. But off the top of today's show, I've got something I really wanted to share with you because I've been wondering how long it would take me to get on the bogeys radar once I arrived and started doing this job. It's 8 minutes after 8 o'clock, 64. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. There is a website and it's called Better Idaho. Just stumbled across this the other day. Many years ago, I remember having a conversation with Ann Coulter. She was on a radio show with me, and during one of the commercial breaks, she was telling me I should sign up for something called Google Alerts. She said that way you'll know whoever and whatever is talking about you on the internet. So I followed up with her advice, and I get these periodic alerts that allow me to really track all of that down. And one of those is from this website called Better Idaho, which I think these people always write these, they put up these websites while they're working in mom and dad's basement. And who knows, when the guy actually is kicked out of the basement, he may have to work on it at the local library, which may slow down a lot of the progress of the actual publication. And they like to refer to themselves as we, usually when it's only one of them. You may be aware, there was a story that broke a few months ago from the people who are behind Premier Radio Networks. They syndicate, of course, some of the shows you hear on this radio station, Rush Limbaugh, Sean Hannity, Coast to Coast, as well as Glenn Beck. And it was said that all of the people around the country who had been complaining about Rush Limbaugh to the network and to advertisers were actually just 10 people. But they had hundreds of email addresses and phony identities, and they were writing all of these people demanding that Limbaugh be taken off the air and demanding boycotts of products. When it turned out it just came down to 10 people. That's called liberal dimitude. That's lying in order to get what you want, and subterfuge. Which because I guess they can't come up with any argument, rational or logical argument on their own. That's what they like to do. So this guy publishes this website and he calls himself We. Now it seems that this website has mainly been involved with same-sex civil liberties over the years, but now he is upset because we have been talking about the planned resettlement of Syrian Muslims in the Magic Valley. He does not appear to live in the Magic Valley, but he is going to have a say on all of this. And he criticizes me on the website. First of all, I want to thank you, pal, for the commercial. A friend of mine, Steve Heil, who's a retired colonel from the United States Air Force, has been a guest on the show now and then. Steve's a pretty stand-up guy. He was the administrator of the Shuttle Challenger Commission when they had the 175th commemoration of the Battle of Fort McHenry. Steve worked side by side with Tom Clancy putting that together. He's got a tremendous logistical background. He actually found a picture of this guy online last night and sent me the photograph, and it's absolutely hysterical. A guy looks like Grizzly Adams, and he's standing out in the woods. I don't know. I guess he's out there to go to the bathroom or something like that. You'll need a spade so you can bury it if you'd like to do the proper thing. But this guy goes on to say on the site that I am a New Yorker. Now, the object being, even though it is the capital of liberalism and he's a liberal, the idea is to portray me as one of these guys who was sitting atop a great high-rise, a penthouse in Manhattan, sipping Cabernet, and relieving myself not in the woods but on the crowd below. Although I actually grew up, well, in every direction I turned in the Alleghenies where I grew up, there was nothing but a dairy farm, no matter where you looked. If you threw a rock, you had about a 100% chance of actually hitting a dairy cow, no matter what direction you were throwing a rock. So that comparison actually makes me a lot more like an Idahoan, probably, than just about anybody else who's passed through here who was not a native-born Idahoan. But what's strange about all of this, he's trying to point out that I do not represent the values and views of this state because I am an outsider. I'm an American citizen. I'm native-born. I'm a Christian. Have been working pretty much since I had my first paper route and other payroll jobs from a very young age, working in family business since I could really just walk. And so I got a pretty good pedigree, and I grew up in a community where we were mainly surrounded by good Methodist, Baptist, Roman Catholics, and Amish. So you had a very strong work ethic and all of that. So he, in his view, I am unworthy, he thinks, of actually coming here and having a job on the radio. On the other hand, a group of unknown Syrian Muslims who could number originally in the 100 to 300 range and then into the thousands, he says will be okay. They will be a much better fit for Idaho. What kind of logic is that? I mean, seriously, does he think that these people are going to line up and go up to Boise with him and argue to add the words? Hardly. That's not going to happen. So it just shows you what fools these people are. Meanwhile, I went to the segment of the website that says About Us, which means him. And it says he represents the real progressive views of Idahoans, and that Idahoans are actually very progressive people, which raises the question, why has it been more than half a century since Idaho voted for a Democrat for president of the United States? And why are there no Democrats holding statewide office? Why is it the Democrats barely have they wouldn't need much more than a closet to caucus in the state legislature? If Idaho is such a dang progressive state, how come he can't answer any of those questions? No, you know what it is? He thinks he's smarter than everybody else, and he needs to educate all of you dumb dummies as to how things really work. And if you would just, he's begging, by the way, for people to send him money so he can keep the site afloat. I don't know that he's got a job otherwise. Maybe that's the reason. It's 8:14. Bill Colley with you this beautiful morning. And I do want to point out it is a very nice day. We've had the sprinklers going outside. The sunshine is out. That's a good sign. We haven't had a lot of that lately. And, well, if we have, it's usually been topped off by a rain shower at the end of the day or a thunder boomer. 64 right now at our studios. And if you'd like to reach me at 8:15 this morning, you can give us a shout at 736-0300, 736-0300. So I just wanted to point that out this morning. Apparently, the lefties are already figuring that they can just get rid of me by publishing on a couple of obscure websites that I have been somewhat controversial in the past. Really? And I'm in the talk radio business? Why should I be shocked by any of that? Why should anybody else be shocked by any of that? But what really, I think that the part that galled me the most was that I am the so-called outsider, and yet they want to welcome all of these unknown people with open arms who have a different culture and a different faith. And as I mentioned that, a friend of mine sent me this morning. She lives in Texas, but she's a native of, she's an outsider too. She's a native of Montana. But now she lives in Texas, another one of those, naughty states. And she sent me this from WorldNet Daily. Minnesota Muslims are brutally honest. We want Sharia. A fellow went out and decided to do some interviews with some people in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area in Minnesota, and they happen to be Somali refugees. On Friday, a camera crew with David Horowitz Freedom Center released a video posted to Robert Spencer's blog, Jihad Watch, in which documentary filmmaker Amy Horowitz captures Somali men and women on the streets answering simple questions. Their answers to questions about Islamic law, American law, and issues of peace and freedom. Several of the Muslim men told the interviewer it was, quote, easy, and that is, unquote, to be Muslim in America. They said persecution was non-existent. They're free to worship as they please. Which, of course, in their countries, you have only one choice. Where they came from, there's only one choice. And if you belong to any other faith that is not Muslim, Well, I think that we all know what usually happens in those situations. This morning, 4 Americans have been captured in Yemen by Iranian-backed rebels. You will not expect them to come out of there alive. They are likely going to, well, how shall we say? The sun shot! Right. One Somali American stood out from the rest while being interviewed. Quote, "This is a free country. That's the beauty of it. We love America. It's a great country, freedom of choice, freedom of religion, so we don't have any issues," unquote, said the neatly dressed man with a sport coat and tie. Then things started to devolve. One young man with dark sunglasses and a big smile, followed by another in a plaid dress shirt, and another with long hair stuffed under a Brooklyn Nets baseball cap, all said they would prefer to live under Islamic law rather than American law. "I'm a Muslim. I prefer Sharia," the man in the dress shirt said. "Sharia law, yes," said another. "Of course, yeah," said the one in the baseball cap. And it just kept going. And a woman who was wearing a pink hijab and traditional dress was asked if it's okay for a father to make his young daughter marry a man of his choice. Yeah, he can. He has the authority, to do that," she said. "How young do you think it would be okay?" the interviewer asked. 15, she answered. The youngest person interviewed, a boy who appeared no more than 14 or 15, said it was easy to be a Muslim in his local school. He said he did not experience any persecution being a Muslim in Minneapolis. Then they got into discussing some of these cartoon drawings of the Prophet Muhammad. And all of these people said it should be illegal. And then they also said that the people who draw those cartoons deserve anything that happens to them. The sun shot! Yes. So there you have it. That's from the streets of Minneapolis, St. Paul, where many of these people are being resettled because, of course, they're going to be good for the country. How many more are coming here? Well, again, a few hundred to perhaps thousands. And you're going to start hearing these types of comments from these people, I'm sure, at some point about, well, if we could only just have our law instead of your law. Every time I hear someone say, yeah, but the possibility of that happening, they will be coming. There was a line in the movie Dances with Wolves where the Kevin Costner character explains to the Graham Greene character that more people like Costner will be coming, as numerous as the stars in the sky. The floodgates open slowly, and then it begins to pick up a pace, dramatically at some point. And I'm just telling you, every time government tells you this is going to be good for you, you should be very, very concerned, because you see so many examples of things government has talked about in the past that obviously aren't. I have a friend coming up in just a few minutes. He's going to be chatting with us. But Beau Biden, the late Attorney General of Delaware and the oldest son of the Vice President of the United States, who died tragically from brain cancer over the weekend. We have more details on that coming up in just a few minutes. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, as well as you can hear us anywhere all over the world online at newsradio1310.com. I worked in media in state of Delaware, Delmarva Peninsula. In fact, I was working in what they call a hyphenated market between some communities in Maryland and some communities in Delaware. Well, in Delaware, everything is hyphenated like that because radio signals reach into multiple states in the area. But I never actually got to personally meet the Attorney General. Well, he was serving as Attorney General at the time while I was there, and then he had stepped down with plans to run for governor in another year. And his name was Beau Biden, Beau being his nickname. He was Joseph Robinette Biden III, the son of the Vice President of the United States. But when he had been ill in 2010, I sent him a card and wished him well, and I got a note back from the man. And that very same year, my brother passed away from cancer. I have a friend of mine who lives in Delaware, though, who knew the Biden family quite well because my friend's father was heavily involved in politics in the Wilmington, Delaware area. And then my friend John Brady ended up going into politics and elective office as well. He's also a practicing attorney in several states, we should point out, around the country. He also is in fact, sometimes is at the Supreme Court of the United States in Washington, where he can argue cases. But first of all, I'd like to welcome John to our program. John's timing is great. He's in Florida right now, where they're having a hurricane. John, welcome to the program.
Thanks, Bill, and good morning to everybody in your audience.
Beau Biden got a lot of coverage over the weekend because it's so rare to have a sitting vice president lose a child. Mr. Biden was just 46. But one of the things I noted in some thoughts I had yesterday was sometimes the apple doesn't fall far from the tree, but he was definitely a distinct personality from his father.
He was. He could have just followed the train and be in D.C. as a U.S. Senator, but that wasn't Beau. Beau declined an appointment to be the Attorney General that was offered to him. Instead, he wanted to run for Attorney General. And he got involved in politics in 2006. And we crossed paths several times on the campaign trail. I found him very engaging to folks and had a little different style than his father. Believe it or not, at times he was shy. And having been shy before I had to not be shy anymore as an attorney, I understood that. He would talk to people, and as Attorney General, he fiercely protected children. As you recall, Bill, in his lap got thrown a case of a child predator, then Dr. Earl Bradley, the Lewis, Delaware pediatrician who sexually assaulted over 100 children in his care over a period of time. It was that prosecution that caused Beau Biden not to run for his father's Senate seat in 2010, but instead to run for a second term as Attorney General, and he successfully prosecuted that monster who's serving a life sentence, several life sentences. So he was an attorney. He did go to the same law school his father went to. He was a family man. He survived by 2 children and a loving wife, Haley. He was the epitome of your down-to-earth public servant. Notice I didn't say politician. As you just related about getting a response in the mail when he was sick, he sent me notes thanking me for the words we exchanged on political trails because both of our fathers were involved in Newcastle County government. My dad was an elected official, and so was his dad. That was the vice president's first job, was county council in 1970 in Newcastle County when he was a public defender in Delaware. So it was very tough. I got phone calls on my way here at a conference on late Saturday night, and the words that just came out of me was patriot for his service in Iraq, father, attorney, and public servant as his work as Attorney General for Delaware for 8 years. He was elected the youngest Attorney General in the nation when he took office. He had several high-profile cases. He took on the mortgage companies that were messing with people, foreclosing, using improper documents. He was not afraid to go after those folks that contributed to campaigns heavily, businesses and industry. He stood for what was right and just, and he was the odds-on favorite to become governor in Delaware next election.
Well, John, I want to thank you for spending a few minutes with us this morning. We've got kind of a tight schedule today. Got about a minute to go. Coming up on 8:29:65 right now on Top Story with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX. John Brady is our guest at the moment. John, in the final minute or so, this type of story really, I think, just was crushing to people, no matter what their political party was in a small state like Delaware, right?
Absolutely. Across the board, Republicans and Democrats have come together today in total shock and sympathy for the Biden family, who suffered many tragedies. Beau lost his mother and his sister in a car accident, which he was severely injured in 1972. His dad's brain aneurysm in 1988. And now Beau's loss has just torn apart the Biden family. Delaware has heavy hearts today, and so do a lot of people in the nation. Bill, thanks for being able to spend some time here relating about my friend Beau Biden.
And again, we'll probably be talking to you sometime soon when a big Supreme Court case comes up. Oh, maybe this month.
Yes, sir. You take care, and have a great day to your audience and yourself.
All right, super. John, thank you much for your time today. John Brady, of course, as I mentioned, my personal attorney, had some thoughts about his friend Beau Biden this morning. 8:30:65, you're listening to Top Story. I want to point out on Wednesday morning this week between 8:30 and 9 o'clock, We're going to be joined by the medical professionals from Tripp Family Medicine right here in Twin Falls, located on Fillmore Street across from the main post office. The doctor was in last Wednesday, and he was talking with us about what you should do for preparation if you're going on vacation, or you're sending a child away to camp, or a child away to college later this summer, or perhaps even on mission work, which a lot of our young people in this area do. And we really had, I think, a very freewheeling discussion about that. I do believe we're going to have, we try to keep it topical. That's the key. We want to keep it topical for people who are tuning in and listening. And there are a lot of issues related to medicine that are very much seasonal. We'll be seeing the medical professionals again this week. And if you have a comment or question for them, feel free to give us a call, because how often do you get to actually speak to someone in the medical professions so directly and get an answer to some of those questions? Remember, life's too short not to feel good. And that is the key thing that they like to tell you when you go to the office. It's 8:35. Bill Colley with you this morning, 66 at our studios. I want to thank you for tuning in this morning, and you can reach our program by dialing me up at 736-0300. That is 736-0300. And I do want to point out this story about the vice president's son. When I was a very young broadcaster, it was not my first broadcast job. I had a part-time broadcast job around another job, and then I got a full-time job in radio, and I worked at a tiny little 500-watt AM station for a matter of just a few months when the sheriff's deputies came in to serve the papers on the people who ran the place. So I had to go find another job. But my third radio job was really my formative experience in doing broadcast news at the time. And I remember covering my very first election night, where I set up all of the election coverage. And even the next day, the newspapers were quoting some of the interviews we had on air live that night, because we were able to have the election headquarters talk from one to the other during the course of the broadcast. And we had the mayor conceding, or rather his opponent conceding to him live on radio that night, and all of the comments. And I put all of this together as a really a novice, but we had some big success that night. And when we got off the air after 3 hours and everyone came back and we all regrouped at the radio station, made our plans for the following morning, no one could sleep. Our adrenaline was so high, so we went to a diner a couple of blocks down the street from the radio station. The diner was an old stainless steel diner that sat on pylons over the river that ran through the center of town. In order to go in the front door, you had to walk out on the bridge, and then there were a series of 4 steps from the bridge, the middle of the bridge, that went into the diner. The diner was called Hunter's Diner, or Hunter's Dinerant, I guess is what it said on the actual sign. I did not know it at the time, but Beau Biden's grandfather on his mother's side had owned that diner. His mother, her maiden name was Hunter. And when he passed away over the weekend, there was a photograph that had been taken apparently just a year ago. He and his father went back and visited the diner with the current owners, and there was a photograph of the 4 of them standing in the aisle near the counter. And I remember thinking I spent a lot of my time in that diner, either talking to politicians or talking with coworkers or discussing post-election night shows. And I looked at the picture, and for a moment I could taste the hamburger and French fries that I used to always have, with a big slice of tomato on the hamburger, a little mayonnaise with the ketchup, and a little bit of lettuce as well. But it brought back some memories for me about my own experience, and the fact that if I never crossed paths with the man, I at least had the same experience in eating in the place where he used to go and eat when he would stay with his grandparents every summer when he was young. 8:38 now, and we've got Randy Staples coming up in just a couple of minutes. Bill Colley with you this morning on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Look, after Randy is wrapping up with us, he'll be with us for the remainder of this hour, but I have something that's just been on my mind that I want to talk about following the news at 9 o'clock this morning. And if you go to our website, News Radio 1310 KLIX, I want you to take a look this morning, if you can, at some of the commentaries. One of them, in fact, was about Beau Biden I wrote over the weekend. But I have a commentary there about faith. As some of you know, and maybe it's irrelevant to you if you're not a practicing Catholic, but that's what I happen to be. And I do tend to believe that that we are commanded not just by our churches sometimes, but by God to conduct us, or to conduct our lives in a certain way. And unfortunately, sometimes that whole system seems to break down, and the people who tell us these are the rules don't necessarily follow them. We talked last week that there was a photograph in the newspaper of two men, and I believe that they were the first two men in Idaho to have a civil same-sex wedding after courts struck down Idaho's ban on all of that. And there was a photograph of those two men, and they were celebrating their wedding reception. Well, I went to a different service. Usually I go to an early Sunday morning service. I went to a late Monday morning service yesterday. And who did I spot in the church? And it took me a couple of minutes to put it all together. And then they received communion. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, we'll get into a deeper discussion on this, but that's supposedly an absolute no-no in the Roman Catholic faith. And I have some thoughts about that coming up a little later in the show, and perhaps anybody else who happened to be there may have noticed it as well. You might have some thoughts too, and maybe willing to chime in on all of this. I also shared what happened with Father Dwight Longnecker, who is one of the top bloggers at Pathos, as well as a world-renowned author. And he wrote back a scathing critique of what happened during the course of that Mass here in Twin Falls yesterday. 67 at our studios, 20 minutes away from 9 o'clock. Randy Staples from Idaho Weekly Briefing is on the way. About this time, almost every week, we are joined by the publisher of Idaho Weekly Briefing, and he takes some time out with us to talk about just some issues and some news that is taking place across the state. Today being no different, 66 right now, 8:44. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, as well as newsradio1310.com, which means you can listen to us online anywhere all over the world. And Randy Staples on the telephone with us. And first of all, good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Right off the top, we have a changing of the guard among state Democrats. It was listed last week that, I guess his name is Larry Kank, right? He is...
Yeah.
It is listed that he is doing this because he has just some health concerns. But whenever you read something like this, you know, the skeptic probably that is in a lot of people who have a reporting background as you do wants to check and see if that is indeed the case or if somebody is trying to push somebody out of the way. Is it legitimate that he actually has a health issue?
I think it's probably a pretty fair chance that that's the case. Partly because of his age, he's well into retirement. Partly though also because there's in the Idaho Democratic Party there's not an enormous amount of deep-seated competition to become chairman of the party. It's a little bit more something that if they can find somebody who can do the job and is willing to do it, then they're pretty happy with that. There hasn't been a real leadership fight in the Democratic Party for quite some time in Idaho, compared with the Republicans, where since there's a little bit more clout to be had there's a little bit more impact in Idaho. There often have been contests for the chairmanship of the party, so it's a little different kind of situation. And part of the reason that I find it credible, if there's some sort of a personal reason involved, is that there's no really obvious name for a successor, which is often the case with the Democrats too. It sometimes takes a little while to find one.
I would say too that anybody who's in that role, in some cases, you go to some states, you could look at the party chair and say, okay, that person has done a really great job because they elected, they had an increase in the number of seats they picked up, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But in Idaho, just because of the political composition that has existed, at least in the last couple of decades, I would assume that no matter who is in that role as a Democrat, it's like trying to make bricks without straw.
That's pretty much the case. Yeah, that's about right. In the case of Idaho, there's a limited amount that a party chair can do. I would say that the last few chairs have been, in that kind of a context, reasonably successful in what they've done, because the main thing that they can try to do is to get as many ballot positions filled as possible, to try to fill up those spots, along the ballot, down through the legislative seats and even locally. And the last few, compared with the decade prior to, have had some good luck with that. They've good luck and been able to get some reasonable names filled into those ballot seats. but that's about really all you can really expect and hold them to. And I suppose in that context, Kink has done a pretty good job, and his last predecessor or two have done a pretty good job. But that's really about all you can really judge by.
We have some other news that you were working on this past week, and you were covering some of the hearings on Boulder White Clouds, as it's, I guess, colloquially called by the people who are involved with it, because we don't want to get into too many of those difficult numbers that are assigned to a lot of these things in Washington. But I was reading through that this morning, and I guess maybe you'll have to educate me on this one. Is the idea to increase tourism by establishing this monument?
That's a part of it. There's some hope that if a monument is established, that would increase some tourism. Of course, a large part of the point would be to kind of preserve what's there and limit the any other developmental activities that's going on. This is part of the pressure, though, that's coming in with Mike Simpson, the congressman from the 2nd District, and Jim Risch, who has held a hearing on this. Because if Congress sets wilderness conditions and sets particular conditions that allow for certain types of activity in certain areas, that allow for a little bit more of a variety of things going on there, then that would pretty much back off the idea of setting it up as a monument, which President Obama could do just unilaterally. He has the authority to designate a monument, and that's been kind of the conversation going back and forth. If a wilderness bill, something like the one that Simpson and Risch are working on, gets through Congress, then that probably settles the issue in that regard. If it does not, it may become a monument, which may become a little bit less happy outcome for some of the people locally, and may not reflect some of the local interests quite as well as the bills that are going through, which have been negotiated locally as well as elsewhere for a good many years.
I do want to point out at 8:50 this morning, our guest is Randy Staples from Idaho Weekly Briefing 67 right now at our studios. You're listening to Top Story with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310 KLIX, as well as newsradio1310.com, which means you can hear us online anywhere all over the world. Got a story for you, Randy. Many, many years ago, I was working in a radio station, and I was interviewing a member of the local state assembly when I told her that her leadership had just left for a Crimean resort, and they were going to spend 2 weeks there so they could study the tourism situation while they sunned on the beach. And I asked her, I said, so are the taxpayers benefiting from this, or are your leaders, are they just going over there because this is a great way to get some sunshine and, frolic in the water? And she was a little dumbfounded. They hadn't even told her that they were going. We just had a recent trip where the governor took a delegation to Peru. I believe it was Peru, right?
Yes, that's correct.
And this was a trade mission. But my question is, how much trade actually goes on here, or is it more of an opportunity to see some ruins? I just wonder sometimes if the taxpayers are benefiting from any of this.
Well, there's always that question. I think there actually is some benefit. This was a trip to Peru and Mexico. I think sometimes if they're well organized and they're well advanced, some of these trips can be of some real benefit. And in terms of Peru, for example, the governor's office reported that Idaho's exports amounted to $17 million in 2014, which is not huge, but it's significant. But it grew quite a bit. It grew by about 1/6 over the year before. So there's some real push. And I would have to say that unless you're kind of an environmental tourist, Peru is probably not quite that same kind of sunshine and beaches sort of place. It's a poorer country. It's not really the type of place that that most people would go to vacation in. And the trip to I believe it was Mexico City kind of qualifies in the same way. They're not really places that you go to vacation. This sounds like a fairly legitimate kind of trip, and Butch Otter has made a point since he was elected governor of saying that he sees himself as kind of a salesman for Idaho. And in his private life, years before, when he worked for the J.R. Simplot Company, international relations in terms of trade development was part of what he did. So it's kind of in keeping with what he's been doing for quite some time.
And I think I recognize those efforts every time I drive to work and I pass by Glanbia.
Yeah, there are some of those efforts have borne some fruit. I think you do have to look at some of the travel considerations that some people take, when they're traveling around, especially some members of Congress. There are a few that have really gotten notorious for hanging out in sunny climes. But I think that most of these trade missions, and I'll include most of those that other states do too. Idaho's in no way unique in this. Most other states' governors participate in trade missions too, and they do it for the same reason that if they're well organized, if they're well put together, and they've got the right relationships built, they can sometimes help bring some business back to the state.
We had a story late last week. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals basically has rejected Idaho's ban on abortions after 20 weeks. And I get, from my perspective, I'm knowing the history of the Ninth Circuit, I don't think I'm surprised by this whatsoever. But still, it does show you that there's a contentious relationship between state government here and that court, and it doesn't seem to get any better.
Oh, that's certainly true. Of course, that was a decision upholding the Idaho District Judge, Lynn Windmill. So the reaction was similar there. There was, at the time the bill was passed, there was a good deal of warning that it might not pass muster in court. But we'll see what happens from there. From here, of course, it can be appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. There's always the question whether the Supreme Court grants cert, as they say, whether they will hear the case, and we'll find out about that later on, whether they decide to hear it or not, and if so, what they decide to do. But for the time being, and I would have to say that yeah, it was pretty predictable what was likely to happen in this case, and that's where the law stands at the moment.
It does not. Well, when I see a decision like this, though, it doesn't hurt the people who actually perhaps knew they were even going to lose. From a political standpoint, they can point the finger and say, "Aha! Well, there's the infamous Ninth Circuit again."
Oh, you're right. You're right. Certainly, from a political standpoint, from the point of view of those who voted in favor of the bill and kind of wanted to make the point. Yeah, that's certainly the case. But then the critics, can also say that you're more interested in grandstanding than you are in actually trying to solve a problem. And I'm sure that argument will be coming back again too.
Any major predictions that you have? Here we are now getting into perhaps a slower season. Well, we would think it's a slower season, but obviously the Senate was still working in Washington last night, so we have our Senate delegation out of town. But any predictions in the near-term future that we should be looking for?
It will be a little bit quiet. Of course, right now they're focusing very heavily on the Patriot Act and trying to make sure that the provisions that most people agree need to be passed in the Patriot Act. And there are a lot of the Patriot Act covered a lot of territory, and there was a good deal of it that I think is not really that controversial, and that most people would probably agree is a good idea. There are just certain provisions of it that really are more controversial. And my guess would be, or what they may want to do, is to for the time being at least, pull out those pieces that are not very controversial and just push those on through. For that, they can probably easily get the votes pretty quickly to run them on through.
And it seems that Mike Lee from neighboring Utah brokered the deal to at least get this thing complete.
Yes, yes, he was involved with that, and there are several other states from the region that have legislators that have been heavily involved with that. Ron Wyden in Oregon, of course, has been heavily involved with that, along with Rand Paul.
Well, I want to thank you very much for your time, and we look forward to talking to you again next week, same time and same channel.
Sounds good. We'll see you then.
Randy Staples is the publisher of the Idaho Weekly Briefing, joining us this morning. And I'll give you some information in just a moment, too, on where you can find a link to all of that. That's on the way this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX, as well as newsradio1310.com. This is Top Story with Bill Colley. It's 8:58, coming up, of course, on news at 9 o'clock from Fox. Also, in the next hour of the program, two things we're going to be talking about. Number one, blatant disrespect for the Roman Catholic Church, and perhaps even overlooked by some of the people who were at a mass here in Twin Falls, Idaho yesterday, as well as a visit to kind of calm things down a little bit, to talking about the skies and the like with Chris Anderson from the Herod Center at the College of Southern Idaho. Details on the way in just a couple of minutes. It's 68, going to be a beautiful day today. So I decided to go to church yesterday morning, and normally what I end up doing is I go to an 8:30 mass because I'm a wide awake guy because of what I do during the week. I'm up during the week around 4 o'clock in the morning, so on weekends, pretty much the same thing. So by the time 8 o'clock rolls around, I've got a lot of things done around the house. In fact, some mornings I've already popped into work, and we have a feeding station for some of the neighborhood cats out back. I come in and I make sure, because they don't know it's the weekend, I give them a little bit of food, and then I usually head off to an 8:30 church service. Yesterday, I had a couple of things I needed to do in the morning, and I decided to reverse that because I wanted to get these things out of the way, and decided I would go to a 10:30 service instead, which I rarely ever do. But I made up my mind that was going to have to work in my schedule yesterday, so I drove to church just about 10 o'clock, went inside, took my seat, and I was sitting there, and I was looking around a bit after I did my meditation and prayer, and sitting there waiting for the service to begin, and just calmly, as I like to do this, just go in. I don't like all of the chattering that's not supposed to take place. You're supposed to be quiet, and the ushers aren't supposed to be doing all the backslapping and the glad handing, and it's supposed to just be a good half hour of contemplation for most people. That's the recommendation. So, and again, I say recommendation. Well, really, in the Roman Catholic faith, which I'm a member of, it's pretty much the rule. But as many of you know who attend a variety of churches, sometimes the rules, there's a lot of wiggle room, whether there should be or not. So I was sitting there, and I noticed two men sitting about half a dozen rows up ahead of me, and they had the same haircuts, and they were wearing the same plaid shirt. And I thought, oh, they must be twins. Then a woman came over and gave one of them a big hug, as if she knew him, and they chatted for a few minutes. And then the woman wandered away, and then the service began. And if you're familiar at all with what Roman Catholics do, we do a lot of rising, and then we do a lot of sitting, and then we do a lot of kneeling, and there's a certain order to it. Well, at one point I noticed the two men stand, and one is about half a foot taller than the other, and I thought, well, no, maybe they're not identical twins. And then communion came along, and now in the Roman Catholic faith, this is not symbolic. We believe that this is actually transubstantiation takes place, and that you are literally consuming the body and the blood of Christ. I think I've got that right. I think that's the way I was taught. And because of that, there are certain strictures, certain rules. And if you have committed some sort of grave sin prior, you are supposed to confess that sin, so that you can clear your soul, if you will. You can cleanse your soul, and that then, therefore, you can go ahead and you can partake of communion. But if you are not in a state of grace, this is a very serious matter. And this is what Catholics are taught to believe. This isn't like some churches which just say, all right, we'll pass around a loaf of bread today out of a symbolism. And that's okay if that's what you believe. I'm not arguing with that. Although I did see today that the Anglican Church, which was a splinter from 500 years ago from the Roman Catholic Church, the Anglican Church is considering calling God Mother. So, we're dealing with a lot of changes in religious faith from the traditions that many of us knew when we grew up. So these men got up to go partake of communion, and then suddenly it dawned on me, I had seen their picture in the newspaper last week. I had seen their photograph. The two of them were wearing corsages, and they were cutting up a wedding cake at their wedding reception. Now, the state of Idaho could not block same-sex marriages. Speaking of the infamous Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, which we were just talking about a few minutes ago with Randy Staples, the state of Idaho was prevented from blocking these things from happening. And these men were married in a civil ceremony, because surely the Roman Catholic Church would not be marrying two men or two women. And it wouldn't be marrying 6 men to 1 woman or 6 men to 1 man, or it would not be marrying anyone to a horse or a cow or a pig. I'm just telling you right now, the Roman Catholic Church says marriage is between 1 man and 1 woman. And that's what it says officially. And then these men went up to partake in communion. Now, I can't get into their own souls. I don't know what they're thinking. Number 2, perhaps they actually went to the priest and confessed. But why would they go and confess? If they literally believe that they are married and that they have a legal right to it, then they don't feel that they're sinning. So perhaps they did not even go to confession, because why would they go and then say in front of a priest in confession that their marriage is actually a sham and they're sorry about it? Because they're not sorry about it. So they went forward and they took communion. Now, the priest in that situation is not supposed to, my understanding, provide them with communion. However, what we have seen happen in recent years, there was a priest who actually did that to a couple at a church in the Washington Archdiocese in Maryland, and he was removed from ministry, even though he followed exactly what the church taught. I have, by the way, been engaged to the same woman for 3 years now. And when we got engaged, we went to see the priest at our local parish about performing a marriage ceremony. Also, what had happened at the same time, during a microburst, a tree had fallen on my house. I had to move out and buy a house of my own. And her company was sold, and she had been provided housing through her company. She had nowhere to go, so we went to tell the priest we were going to move into the same house together. And he told us straight out, he said, all right, I'm going to tell you one thing right now. If you're going to receive communion, and if I am going to perform your wedding, officiate at your wedding, he said, you are going to have to lead celibate lives. No, I don't. I'm a man. I'm not dead yet. It's very difficult to do. But it's not just your church that is calling you to do that. It's God that's calling you to do that. And so we therefore went ahead and we followed exactly what he told us to do. And yet, I see so many priests themselves breaking the rules, and maybe the priest is even unaware of who these men are, but I'm going to tell you right now, I sat there just in disbelief yesterday. I've never seen anything quite like this happen inside a Roman Catholic church. You're on the air with Bill Colley at 9:13 on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX. What's on your mind?
Well, this is the thing. I guess maybe some people might call me a fool, but, I really do believe there is a God who exists. And so my attitude is that if that's true, and if in the scriptures it talks about he knows every hair on your head, he knows when a sparrow falls. And I say to myself, and I think people think that to themselves, oh, how could that be? Every person on the earth, he knows every hair on their head. When a sparrow falls, billions of sparrows, whatever. I don't know. I don't know it. I don't know how to make, understand it. But I know that I run the risk if I don't believe. And if you really do humble, this may sound, like, who is this guy to tell me, he's such a humble man? You know what? I've been through a lot in my life, and I've not learned that if I just get my heart in the right place, that I can get through anything, and that every day is a blessing. I'm so happy and grateful for all my blessings. But if you choose to mock God, like you're only going to church because you think you're fooling the people, well, if God does exist, do you not believe that he knows every thought you said, every thing you've said, every thought you've had.
Right,
Do you
right.
believe in God or not? And that's my point.
I thank you very much for chiming in this morning, and I know that there are a lot of people that I go to church with who perhaps have a thought or two on this, but at the moment they probably feel, why do I want to put my neck out on the line? I raised some questions. This was a post I wrote, commentary at our website, News Radio 1310 KLIX, a question of faith or none. Does my pastor know these men? Did he see the pictures in the paper? Does he care? This raises serious questions about what the church teaches. Does it excuse my myriad sins? Because if they don't have to worry about it, why should I? Is my pastor trying to play nice and avoid a confrontation? In a similar situation in Maryland, a priest was removed from ministry, and he played by the rules, but his bosses said, well, we want to be the church of nice. Does my pastor fear a similar rebuke? Is Nancy Pelosi right? Does being a Roman Catholic now mean we make up the rules as we go along to serve the latest cultural fashions? I ended up emailing this to Dwight Longenecker, who, as I mentioned, is a writer at Pathos. And he started out his life as an evangelical Christian pastor, became an Anglican priest, and now is a Roman Catholic priest. And oddly enough, by the way, has a wife and family because he had them before he actually made the conversion. And he's an author of multiple books, widely read all over the world, and he wrote me back and he said, thank you for your email. He went on to write, I believe we are entering a time of sifting. The faithful Catholics will soon be sifted out from the unfaithful, and the issue you raise will be the decider. Many Catholic priests and bishops are people who will not stand up for church teaching on this matter, but will compromise and yield to the aggression of the homosexuals and their powerful friends. Priests will be either too cowardly to comfort the situation or confront the situation, or they will actually agree with the homosexual agenda. And he writes, you can have full confidence in the timeless teaching of the church and remain a Catholic, but we will see an increasing number of priests and people who do not keep the faith. And he says, we're facing a time of persecution, and as has happened in the past in many places and in many times, many priests and people will give in and lose their souls by doing so. The question, he writes, is not the faithfulness of the church, but the faithfulness or not of individual Catholics. These are difficult times, and they will become more difficult very soon. And then he concludes with, watch and pray. Now, I'm telling you, I walked out of there thinking maybe it's time I look for another church. But after reading Father Longenecker's comments, I decided that I've got to stick it out. But I know it's not going to be very comfortable for me to walk back in there next week or any day in between, simply because I have brought this to the public attention. And you know that likely I am going to be the bad guy in all of this, and not the two gentlemen who are in clear. And everybody out there is a sinner. But this was a challenge to the authority of this church, which was granted its authority by St. Peter some 2,030 years ago. And I am absolutely flummoxed when I look at all of this, and I can't understand why anyone, unless they just were not aware of who these men happen to be, would allow this to happen in this particular situation. And unfortunately, I didn't feel it was the right spot to walk out in the street afterwards and confront the priest as he was shaking hands, saying goodbye to everyone for the day. And he's away at a conference for a few days now. But seriously, people have to understand that their faith is not fungible. This is not a democracy. It's not the Democrat Party. It doesn't run that way. And I am just absolutely gobsmacked this morning that I even have to talk about it. But to me, it is one of those situations, it is an absolute affront to the creator of the universe. And sometime, somewhere, someone has to have the courage to stand up and say, hey, we've got a serious problem here. In the meantime, we're going to lighten things up in a few minutes on the program this morning. Bill Colley with you today on News Radio 1310 KLIX, as well as newsradio1310.com. Going to talk a little science with Chris Anderson from the Herod Center. That's on the way. It's 20 after 9. Hey, we're almost at 70 degrees already. Some of us are still shopping for an air conditioning unit. Difficult to find one lately. I'm joined in the studio this morning by Chris Anderson from the Herod Center at the College of Southern Idaho. First of all, Chris, before you say that, I actually have to make sure that you have a microphone that's open. Try that again.
Good morning.
There you go. I can hear you, and everyone else is thinking.
I could shout, but
Yeah. I think we could just go find an open window. We'll broadcast to people that way.
Old school.
We're almost to 70 degrees. We're at 69 right now. This is Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I was just sharing with Chris off air. A friend of mine sent me a link to something called suspiciousobservers.org, and he was curious if you'd ever heard of this website. But you had not. But,
No.
But again, in the internet age, there must be countless websites devoted to, and these people are talking a lot about solar flares and solar spots and impacts on weather and the like. And
Sure.
there is, to a degree, some relation there, right?
There is, yeah. You can see, for example, the 11-year solar cycle is reflected in tree rings. And the exact link is not perfectly well understood, but yeah, there does seem to be. I mean, you can literally see the tree rings will vary their width over an averaged 11-year cycle, which is what the sun's solar cycle is. So, how the sun's magnetic field activity and the very slight variations, the amount of energy it gives affects tree rings. There's various ideas about that, but it's still not entirely clear. And of course, the old adage is that correlation does not imply causation. So, you could argue that tree rings are driving the solar cycle, although that's probably the least likely explanation there. But
well, the sun obviously has such an impact in our lives, and those of us who were at the parade the other day and forgot a hat know that.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Well, you have a lot going on, obviously. Some things scheduled. I saw a big sign, in fact, out the other day outside the observatory as I drove by.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Just reminding people of some of the upcoming events.
Yeah, even though summer has not officially begun, as you all know, since Memorial Day is the unofficial start of summer, we've hopped on that bandwagon. And knowing that kids are going to be out of school pretty soon here, we've got lots of things to offer over at the museum. We've got our summer planetarium schedule is now in effect. Now, normally during the school year, it's shows on Tuesday nights, Friday nights, Saturday afternoons, and evenings. Well, in addition to those shows, we have a grand total of 10 different shows playing at various times throughout the week, Tuesdays through Saturdays, including in the afternoons. So we've got 1:30, 2:30, 3:30 shows during the week, and then those same times plus a 4:30 plus the evening shows on Saturday. So no excuse if you're looking for time to come take in a planetarium show. And one good reason to come over and check it out is we've got a brand new planetarium show called Moon's Worlds of Mystery, and that one also includes the live sky tour afterwards. But yeah, if you think about it, there's a lot more moons than there are planets in the solar system, and many of them, if they were orbiting the sun, would be planets in their own right. So there's some fascinating moons out there, and that's what the show really focuses on. So that's something if you're looking for a new program at the planetarium, and lots of opportunities to see shows. And then of course we also have our solar viewing sessions. Those are every Wednesday afternoon, 1:30 to 3:30. Those are free. And so as long as the skies are clear, you can come take a look at the sun, see what it's up to, see if the people at Suspicious Observers know what they're talking about.
Yes.
And then, speaking of Wednesday afternoons, this is something we just started up. It'll be commencing next week, called Afternoon Adventures for Kids. And depending on, you'll have to look at week by week which one, because they're different age groups that they target. The first one we'll doing is on the 10th. It's called Nature Walk for Children for ages 4 through 7. For $5, kids come over. They get to do a little sort of a nature walk, a guided tour around the CSI campus, looking for various, flora and fauna and that sort of thing. And then best part is they get done. It starts at 1 o'clock. They get done in plenty of time to come back and take in some of the solar viewing too. So can make a whole afternoon of it on Wednesday at the Herod Center. If you want to do nighttime stuff, we've got our monthly free star party coming up on the 13th, second Saturday, of course. And if you've been watching the night sky recently, you've probably noticed that really bright object over in the west. That's Venus, brightest of the planets. Up to the left of Venus, that's Jupiter. Well, all through the month of June, watch those two planets, because they're going to be getting closer and closer and closer to each other. Literally on the last day of the month is when they'll be at their closest. They'll be in what we call conjunction, and that'll be kind of neat. The two brightest planets right next to each other, cheek to jowl in the sky. So that'll be a fun thing to kind of keep an eye on. But of course, those will be two of our targets that we'll be looking at on the 13th, in addition to Saturn, which has returned to the evening sky. And if you've never seen the rings of Saturn through a telescope, that is a must-see. I mean, people all the time will come and look at that and go, well, that's just a picture you put in the telescope, right? It's like, no, I promise you that's the real deal. So, yep, and so those will be three of many targets we'll be looking at on the 13th. The following Saturday is our second annual Hagerman Fossil Bed Star Party. So again, great opportunity to come look through big scopes from a dark location. So lots more targets available to us there. So
I was going to say, when you mentioned the young people coming by, and of course in summer, this is a great opportunity for them, because they have a little time off, or you would think that they would have time off.
Yeah.
Whether you get 200 or 20, though, because it's the ones who are really inspired by this. The future people who are going to make all of the discoveries
Right.
aren't a large mass. They're generally just a small group.
Sure.
And you get, I would assume, those young people who just have a real thirst for this.
Well, and whose parents are looking for some way to, make sure their kids aren't turning to mush over the summer months when they're out of school. So, well, in all honesty, we do get a lot of homeschool groups during the year, and they don't necessarily follow the same schedule that the public schools do too. So a lot of the homeschool groups will take advantage of these programs too. So that's a great way for them to enhance their kids' education. So.
We've got Chris Anderson in studio with us. He's going to be here another 20 minutes. 9:30 right now. It's 69. You're listening to Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Perhaps you have a comment or question for the scientist in the building. Feel free to give us a call following the break. A lot to talk about. By the way, this morning the moon, just the clear sky and that huge.
Oh yeah.
It looks huge. That what you call it's an optical illusion.
The full moon effect is what it's called. Yeah.
Yes, there you go. We've got lots coming up in just a few minutes. Hope you can stick around. Joining us in the studio, Chris Anderson from the Herod Center at the College of Southern Idaho, right here in Twin Falls. We were just taking a look at that website, suspiciousobservers.org, and it looks like a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, of course, you look at the blog, and the blog can be a whole different kettle of fish from the official site, right? Because anyone can get on there and make whatever comments they want. But it's some of it looked like
George Norrie.
Yeah, in that neck of the woods. Yeah,
which is a lot of fun. I mean, I listen to it driving in the morning, and there's something about it. Even the biggest conspiracy theories, and then even some of the writers who talk about extraterrestrials and the like. Because we're all fascinated by that possibility.
Well, I mean, what was the tagline from X-Files? I want to believe, or whatever it is. So
right.
It's like, yeah, it's fun to believe in this stuff. Absolutely.
Well, but from your standpoint, there's a good question. We all talk about the possibility. All of us who grew up on Star Trek, especially, all talk about the possibility that someday there will be that contact. But they've had this SETI project set up for so long.
Oh yeah, since the 70s,
and nothing has happened.
That's true. Yeah, it's as they point out, it's a big universe, and the space that they're searching. I don't mean physical space, but the sort of radio frequency space that they're searching is enormous as well. And there's some certain assumptions there that extraterrestrials are okay with broadcasting their presence out into the universe. Well, we are, but that doesn't mean that every one of them would be, right? So we make some assumptions based on our own activities that other intelligences would be doing the same, but there's no guarantee of that. They could be decided to be radio silent for whatever reason. So.
Do you believe that there may possibly be somebody out there that we just will never contact?
Oh, I'd be stunned if the only intelligent life in the universe is on Earth. That would be flabbergasting to me. I mean, the line from the Contact movie was if we're the only life in the universe, it's an awful waste of space. It's and from a less flip standpoint, the conditions that exist on Earth can't be unique in the universe. There's just too many possibilities for
right. There's just so many stars and so many planets.
And who knows what kind of forms life might take that we can't even conceive of because we've never seen any examples but the ones we have here, DNA-based, carbon-based life forms. But who knows what other ways that life may have found a way to exist in the universe. So.
There was a Star Trek Next Generation episode where they were dealing with silicon-based life form.
I remember that one. Yeah.
And I remember sitting there thinking, aha, somebody behind this show might have done some reading.
Yeah, well, and of course, the argument is that silicon and carbon behave somewhat similarly according to their positions on the periodic table, and so, perhaps you could have the chemistry necessary. Now, silicon's not quite as versatile as carbon is, but maybe you don't have to be as versatile and still be able to pull it off. That's, the universe is pretty creative, as we've seen. Look at the bizarre array of life on our planet alone that's all DNA and carbon-based. Who knows how bizarre it could be using some other chemistry, so...
A friend of mine sent me a video yesterday, and I was watching the video, but before I did, there was a 59-second commercial that came up, and I tend to watch the commercials because I know you've got to pay for the video.
Sure.
So the commercial turned out to be about a project for a nuclear-powered craft to Pluto and then beyond.
Oh, wow.
And they actually had they've done their animations, and the idea is that it'll take, I mentioned how many years to get it there. Not as long as I thought it would. And the idea is that they will get the best data they've ever had in that flyby and then continue out into the universe beyond the solar system.
Well, I mean, this isn't talking about New Horizons, is it?
It may have been it.
Because New Horizons is going to be arriving at Pluto this summer, and it's not a nuclear propulsion system, but it does use radioisotope thermoelectric generators for its electrical power. It's got plutonium on board for its electrical power. So yeah, and it is going to fly past Pluto and take the very first close-up pictures, and then continue on into the Kuiper Belt and see what else they can find. And Hubble telescope's been kind of looking ahead to try to find potential target objects for it to visit. So yeah.
You may recall in that opening of the one segment or sequence of one of the Star Trek movies where it was a Voyager is floating out there, and the Klingons are trying to do some target shooting, and they blow it up, and one of them says, "What was that?" And he says, just some space junk." We have a caller with us. You're on the air with Chris Anderson from the Herod Center on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Say, I just wondered if you'd done any looking into this supposed cold fusion generator that Lockheed Martin is talking about.
I haven't heard of Lockheed Martin specifically working on that. I mean, of course, the cold fusion things goes back to the 80s or 90s when Pons and Fleischmann at Utah had their first desktop thing where they thought they had cold fusion and then no one could reproduce the results. But no, I hadn't really seen Lockheed Martin. Now, you're not talking about the EM drive that people have been talking about. Is not that one that you're talking about, are you?
No, they have a supposed solution. I don't know.
Huh? No, I'm afraid I haven't heard of Lockheed Martin doing cold fusion stuff.
Yeah, well, you might look that up.
Yeah, I'll take a look at it.
I want to thank you for the call. In fact, on a very serious note, George Norrie had a discussion about that last week. And they did point out, in fact, that nobody was ever able to replicate that. We've got a break coming up, more with Chris Anderson, but my friend who mentioned the website Suspicious Observer says, watch the daily video 5 minutes every morning about 6 a.m. Eastern time. So that'd be a little early for us, but it says the other stuff on the site can be far-fetched.
Okay.
But he said the video is actually very good and very scientific. Coming up on 20 minutes from 10 o'clock, 69 at our studios. Bill Colley with you this morning on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com with Top Story. And Mr. Anderson has a few more thoughts for us before we wrap up today. Chris Anderson joining us from the Herod Center at the College of Southern Idaho. He's got a few more minutes with us. It's 9:43, 69 right now on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX, as well as newsradio1310.com. And, of course, you could reach him while he's in the studio if you'd like, 736-0300. You have one more event, though, you'd like to talk about, too.
Yeah, we've got a new art gallery exhibit. And, of course, like all of our exhibits at the Herod Center, it's free. This one's by an artist named Jessica Larson. It's called 93 at 8. And I'll let you come over and read the artist statement to understand what that title means. But it's a combination of paintings and sculptures and very family-friendly. So, people want to come over and check that out. And, I like to emphasize most of the things we do at the Herod Center have either very low cost or are free. Like I said, the solar viewing on Wednesday afternoons, that's free. The second Saturday Star Party, that's free. The Hagerman Fossil Beds Star Party, that's free. The Planetarium shows are not terribly expensive, certainly cheaper than the movies. Probably made the movie theaters mad when I said that, but and the afternoon adventures for the kids on Wednesdays, those are quite inexpensive as well. So if you're looking for something to do for the family and don't want to spend an arm and a leg to do it, it's a great place to come. So.
I have another note from somebody listening, and they ask, what do you think about thorium for a nuclear fuel?
Oh, there's been a lot of talk about thorium for that reason, because it's much more readily available than the typical things that are used. I mean, plutonium, you can't go mine plutonium. It doesn't exist naturally, and so if you want to have plutonium, you have to create it in a reactor, and therefore there's been quite a shortage of plutonium in recent years. So people have talked about, now thorium doesn't have quite the same energy density, which is part of the reason it hasn't been used as much, but still could possibly be usable for such things. And so there's been a lot of talk about that ever since the plutonium shortage started to really become a problem. So.
I wonder if a fuel like that could be converted for a lot of our uses in space.
That's a good question. I don't know that I've seen studies about the use for thermoelectric generators like they use for plutonium. Again, if I'm correct, I believe it has a somewhat lower energy density per gram, so you're getting less energy per gram compared to plutonium. So in other words, you're carrying effectively more fuel weight than you would for plutonium. But if it's easier to obtain the stuff in the first place, that's a cost balance or cost benefit sort of thing that you want to take a look at. And yeah, people have certainly been talking about it. I've seen kind of a buzz about thorium lately. So yeah.
946, we have a caller with us, and you're on the air with Chris Anderson from the Herritt Center on News Radio 1310 KLIX.
Good morning. Hey, Chris, I just read a recent paper about a new candidate for dark matter. They were calling it dark photons.
Okay.
I was wondering if you could explain that to me. The paper was a little bit confusing, so if you could shed some light on that, no pun intended, I'd appreciate it.
Well, okay, so my understanding of dark matter is that it is effectively a form of matter that does not interact with electromagnetic energy, which means any form of electromagnetic radiation, whether it's light, heat, X-rays, gamma rays, whatever, just goes right through dark matter like it wasn't even there. And that that sounds a little science fiction to say that, but consider that there are other known examples of that within normal matter. For example, the strong nuclear force that holds nuclei together. Well, electrons are completely immune to that. So in effect, the strong nuclear force is ignored by electrons. Electrons are invisible to it. So it wouldn't be an unprecedented idea that there could be some material that simply doesn't interact in any way with electromagnetic radiation. So it sounds to me like they're talking about a different form of electromagnetic radiation that somehow is separate from what we're used to experiencing. And maybe that's, because I know one of the things I've seen about dark matter is they're saying that maybe it has a really, really weak interaction with electromagnetic radiation, and I think perhaps what this paper is talking about, and I haven't seen the paper myself, so I'm just speculating a little bit here, but it could be that it's kind of its own sort of parallel setup where it has its own radiation that it interacts with itself, but not with normal matter or with normal radiation. But yeah, not having seen the paper, I wouldn't be able to say much more about it than that, I guess.
I want to thank the caller for chiming in this morning. It's 9:48. We've got about a minute to go. 70 now, finally hitting 70. It's the first time I've been able to say that on this job, in this show.
Yeah, this is a little unusual. This has been kind of a cooler than normal spring for us here. So,
follow-up question to thorium, but you do use all of the fuel.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and so yeah, like I say, there's been certainly a lot of discussion about thorium, largely because, like I say, it's so much more readily available. You can go mine thorium. You can't go mine plutonium. So it's that availability may outweigh a lot of the other disadvantages, I guess, or compared to plutonium. But
I guess you should, if someone has some investment cash, then you put it into thorium.
Well, yeah, if you think there's consider, most of the plutonium that's being put on these space missions right now is being produced right up the road here at INEL. That's, in fact, I'm pretty sure the New Horizons probe that's on its way to Pluto right now, its plutonium came from INEL. So there's a little bit of Idaho on its way to Pluto right now. So. By
the way, these new missions that are going out through the solar system probably have better camera resolution than anything we launched in the 70s.
Oh, absolutely. And cameras that can operate at much lower power levels as well. So you don't have to have as much fuel on board to keep all the electronics running. Microelectronics can run on much more what's the word I'm looking for here? Much smaller amounts of fuel, I guess, smaller amounts of electricity. So yeah.
Quickly, what's the website?
Website for the Herritt Center. That's the observatory is herritt.csi.edu/observatory, or you can just do herritt.csi.edu. That'll get you to almost all the other events I mentioned, and for that matter, we're on a Facebook page too. So
we want to thank you for coming by. Mike Gallagher coming up in just a moment, right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX.